Welcome back to the channel. So you're joining me today for a season review special that I'm going to go through my 2022 running season. So I know I only started the channel really around about September time, started doing the weekly videos. I'm just going to recap my racing from the start of this year in January, because I think it's a good reason to look back on, and it's very important to look back on what you've achieved in the year before you can plan what you want to do and have goals for the next year. And it might add some ideas of progression from sort of going from around my pace at sub-3 marathon and how I've knocked that down to achieve one of those goals within this year. So starting with the first sort of quarter of the year, in January, I come out of Christmas, probably wasn't in the best shape as we all are after Christmas. And I just wanted to build my mileage up really before I started a marathon block. I booked in for Manchester Marathon at the start of April. It's one I've run in the past, I'd done well there in the past, and that was where I got my first sub-3 in 2019 there, when I ran 2:59:30 something. And I wanted to, because I'd gone off the running, tailed off a bit and was working back into fitness again, I wanted to set down a marker there and break that 3-hour mark again, and possibly even with breaking that 3-hour, achieve a PB in the process. So the plan for January was building this base fitness, so I just planned on going on lots of easy runs really, just to build up that fitness really. I then did a bit of trail running in this time. I do like doing some trail running, but I know it's not really conducive to getting a good marathon time. I just enjoy being out on the trails, being out on a long run in some great countryside. I do think it has a place in my training over the year. So the two sort of main things that I did in January were the Edale Skyline route, which is a lovely route up in the Peak District. It's around about 20 miles, sort of anywhere between 18 and 22 miles, depending on which sort of version of the route that you take. So I ran that with Andy and Phil. I'll pop the Strava stats with everything as I talk through them. So that was a good start to the year, doing that Edale Skyline route. I then, sort of a week or two after that, did the Yorkshire Three Peaks. So I was travelling to the office up near Leeds, and I thought while I'm up there I'll book in for a weekend and plan and do the Yorkshire Three Peaks, because it's something I've always really wanted to do. I quite like the hill walking, being out in the countryside and doing challenges like this. And it is quite a good route that you can run quite a lot of it. So it's around about 24-25 miles, depending on how the navigation is. And it takes in the three biggest peaks in Yorkshire, which are around about 700-800 metres tall. So that was a good challenge really. Did have to walk quite a bit of it, but did get round. So obviously didn't have that low level of fitness that I thought I had in January. So a good January there, just some aerobic base miles and a couple of good runs out on the trails there. I then thought to myself in February that, right, I can't keep running on the trails as much as I love it. I've got a marathon to plan for, and if I keep running on the trails, I'm not going to achieve that sub-3 target that I'd set myself. So I had around 8 weeks or so to train for that marathon, and I did want to sort of get 3 runs in the region of sort of 18 to 20 miles as my long run on the weekends. So I did book in my calendar. I booked in Ashby 20 in March time, and I also booked in a half marathon in February, just so that I could have that benchmark, so I know that I could run a sub 1:30 half. Because I mean, if I couldn't achieve a sub 1:30 half, it's probably going to give me an indication that I shouldn't really be aiming for a sub-3 marathon until I was a little bit fitter. So I ran that Carsington Half, which was a little bit undulating on a trail. Ran that with Jacob, and that's where I met Stuart Beckett, who's got his Beckett Runs channel. So he was doing his first 10k at the time, and me and Jakey ran the half marathon and did it around about 1:29 at Carsington. So that's a good run, and I've got a video on that Carsington half marathon. If you wanted to watch, I'll link it in the comments below. So yeah, that was end of February, so still building up those base miles, but getting in a few longer runs, maybe putting in some tempo runs within my training, targeting that. Really the main goal was that April marathon. So going into March, just carried on this really, carried on the training, sort of around 40 to 50 miles a week, and maybe even pushing it to 60 on the peak weeks, just trying to keep that consistency and the good mileage that I knew I'd need to achieve that sub-3 goal that I had. And another big marker for me was when I first ran my sub-3 in 2019, I'd ran the local Ashby 20 race, which was around 2 or 3 weeks before the marathon. So my thinking behind that was that I could run that 20 mile on a very tough hilly course that Ashby is, and if I could run that at sort of 650s, which is the sub-3 marathon pace, then I had that confidence going into Manchester that I could achieve that for another 10k on a flat course. I knew it worked in the past, so I wanted to try that same approach again. I know a few people might say that it's a little bit too close to your goal race, sort of 2 to 3 weeks out to recover from something like that, but I did treat it as my last sort of long run workout, I suppose. And I'm fairly young and I do recover quite quick anyway, so I didn't really see any harm in doing it 2 to 3 weeks out. If it was a week before, I don't think I'd be doing it, but 2 to 3 weeks was fine for me. So Ashby 20, ran that in 2:15, so I actually ran it quicker than in 2019 when I did get my first sub-3, so I was happy with that. Then going into Manchester Marathon, so this was my big race for the start of the year. I geared up towards doing a spring marathon, done Manchester before, really flat, well organised, fast race, you can always find a good group there, well supported as well because it goes in and out the city, so you've always got someone on the sidelines and drink stations and cheering you on, just strangers on the side of the road really, so that's always good to have from a marathon, especially when you choose a city marathon rather than one that's a little bit more remote. You might not get the same level of support there. So going back to the race of Manchester, so my PB was 2:59:30ish. I then broke this PB by around 2 minutes at Manchester, so I ran a 2:57:08 at Manchester, and I was over the moon with that because I probably thought that I might need a bit more time to prepare for this marathon, with only having sort of 8 weeks from the start of the year when I wasn't really in peak fitness really, but it just shows you that you can achieve quite a lot of fitness in a short space of time if you keep to the right specific training of what race you want to do. So that was really successful. I was pleased with that at Manchester. I then, after Manchester, I thought, well, I don't really have any goals so far, so I will reassess. I did, in a couple of weeks after Manchester, one of my friends Ben, who was targeting Manchester Marathon, we were going to run it together, and he was going to go for his first sub-3 there. And Ben actually ran in 2019, the year that I got my first sub-3. But because Ben couldn't make the Manchester Marathon, he was ill on the day, he'd put back and entered into Boston Lincolnshire Marathon, which was towards the end of April time. So I said that I'd do as much as I could to help him out there and try and pace him on the first sort of half marathon distance, so first sort of 13 miles to, if I could keep going to 20, that would have been great, but I just didn't think my legs had enough in it to pace him till the end, because I'd only ran my goal race 2 weeks before that and I still got all that in my legs. So I ran that with Ben. Pace for the first 15 miles, we did go slightly too quick. I think we went off around 6:30 pace, which would have resulted in probably a low 2:50 if we'd have kept it up. But ran 15 miles around 6:40 pace, I think it was, and then had a bit of a break when I knew that I couldn't run anymore. Let Ben go for it. I then sort of jogged in the last 10-11 miles of it, because I sort of run walking, taking on a bit of water and trying to recover. So I ended up finishing that, and unfortunately I did pick up Ben sort of in the last mile of the race. He was crawling along the side of the road, bless him, and I did pick him up and we finished in around about 3:15. So I mean, 3:15 is still a good time for a marathon. It's just probably not what we were targeting at the time, as we both run quicker marathons and that in the past. So but still, it was a good attempt to go for that sub-3 and to try and help one of my mates get that goal as well. So that wraps up the first sort of third of the year up until the end of April. I'm then going to look at what I did over the summer and then going into the back end of the year. So starting at May time, so the first thing that I did in May was I did a track 3K at that was at one of the British Milers Club events at Loughborough University. So I have done a little bit of track running before, and I do think it's a good idea to just let your legs go at something that's a shorter distance than you're used to. I'd say my favourite distance is more the half marathons and marathons, but in order to get quicker over probably the sort of 5Ks and 10Ks, it doesn't do you any harm letting your legs go at a shorter race like the 3K. So I did that BMC 3K in 10:58, which I think I'd ran around 10 seconds before in 2019 when I was at the same sort of level of fitness. So I was happy I was under 11 minutes, but still really wanted to try and take a little bit off that PB and improve my top end speed. I want to get down to sort of low 10 minutes on that 3K if I can, or maybe even break that 10 minutes with a bit more specific training next time I come to do something like that. I then didn't really have, because I'd trained hard up until April, I give myself sort of a month just to chill out and do something a little bit off plan, but I still wanted to keep a couple of races in there. So I did do a 5 mile at Beeston just to see how my fitness was. It was quite a quick course, to be honest, quite flat and fast, right by the river. I think it did have a little bit of headwind coming into on the turnaround point on the last bit. But I probably just went out a little bit too quick for my fitness level, because I think I went off at low 6-minute mile pace, and at the time couldn't hold this and finished in just close to 32 minutes in the end, which a little bit disappointed with. But the stopwatch doesn't really lie where your fitness is, so it was a good marker just to see where I was fitness wise there. So that's what I got. I got 31:48 for the Beeston 5 mile. I then did a bit more trail running as well in May. So I booked to go to France, to Marseille, and I'd seen that the Calanques National Park, there was a lovely trail that ran about 22 miles called the GR98 51, and it took in all of the caves and inlets on the sort of south coast of Marseille, just south of Marseille. So you could go from just south of Marseille all the way along the coast to a small port town called Cassis, and it has some fantastic views along the way. I did make a YouTube video of this back in sort of May, June time when I did it. Not really got any commentary along to it, so if you just want to see some nice scenery, it's probably a good one to watch, but there won't really be any commentary on it. But yeah, that was, I did enjoy the views there, so I wanted to capture them and look back on them really. So I will link to that if anyone's interested. I also did a bit of trail running in the Lake District as well. So I don't think I've been to the Lake District up until May time this year, which is a bit of a shame because I love the Peak District. I'm quite close to there and like getting out on the trails and walking. But the Lake District was, it was really great to go and visit. So I went up with a friend, Andy, and our plan was, because Andy had entered this 55k Lakeland Trail Ultra, we were going to recce the course over 2 days, so sort of do the first half on the Saturday, the second half on the Sunday. But as it turned out, we just decided to combine the course into 1 day, which probably wasn't the right idea because you don't really want to be running the whole distance of a race like this, I suppose, before you then go and do the race. So we ended up doing that 55k route all in one go, and it was around about 2 months before the race. So myself and Andy, I wasn't doing the race, but Andy was, but we weren't really at the point of training where we were fit enough really to do a 55k ultra race. We did manage it in the end, but it did take a lot of stopping and walking, and the last sort of 5 to 10 miles was quite a struggle for both of us really, just to get round. But beautiful views, one of the longest runs that I've done, toughest runs as well because of all the elevation, and it's definitely something I think about doing again, probably when I've not got the ambitions of the times that I want to do it on the road, that I can go and enjoy some of the trail running instead. So that wraps up May. Coming into June, so I was back into starting to think about doing a autumn marathon at the end of the year here. So I wanted to do a little bit of speed work before the block, so I did some shorter races. I did a 2 mile Washlands Relay, which was one of our club races. That was in 12:36, so probably could have gone a little bit quicker here. I don't remember being that well on the day. Probably would have broke 12 minutes on a different day. I then did the Derby Half Marathon, which is, I think it's the 4th time I've done this race. I did 1:27 for this race. I was pacing Robbie to go under, to break 1:30 for the first time, and we were sort of targeting somewhere between 1:25 and 1:30. So I did enjoy doing this and sort of treated it as like a long tempo run, but it obviously shows that I was sort of a good level of fitness to do a 1:27 quite comfortably there. So I was talking away to Robbie, getting him drinks and talking him through going under that 1:30. Coming on to July, so July, another club race. I did Worthington 6. That was on the Cloud Trail, which is quite a popular trail for training on, especially with the top athletes from sort of Derby and Loughborough way. It's quite close. There's a lot of elites will train on there because it is just a pretty flat off-road course that goes up about sort of 4 or 5 miles, and you can loop back. You can take bikes on there, grab drinks. It's great for long run training. But this was a 6 mile race that I did in around 32 minutes. It was a club race. It's a nice sort of test of fitness. A little bit different to a 10k, just, well, pretty much like a 10k, but just without that little sprint finish thing at the end. You just start your finish 0.2 of a mile earlier, as it's only 6 miles rather than 6.2. So that was quite fun to do in July. It was an evening race, which is always a little bit different, and one that you can just sort of treat as a hard training night rather than giving up a Saturday or Sunday long run to do a shorter distance race, which was ideal for me whilst I was in a marathon block. I also did a 10 mile trail run around Ticknell and Cork Abbey, which was called Brooksies Bash. So that's organised by a local run group called Peak Running. And Brooksy is sort of the lead organiser, founder of Peak Running there. It's one of his favourite training routes there. It's a 10 mile loop off-road, quite a challenging route, and it's been quite a popular race in the last, I think, 4 years or so it's been running. They'll also do a winter edition, same course, just very different conditions because of the sort of conditions you get in winter are a lot different to the summer conditions there. So the other thing that I did in August, so I sort of carried on my training, started sort of a long run training, started some long tempo sessions and thinking about my fueling as well on these long sessions in August. But another thing that I wanted to do was have a go and see where my fitness was over 5k, which is something that I've not done for a while. So I entered one of the quickest 5Ks in the country, really, probably a little bit downhill, so the time might be a bit generous to me. I did the Mid-Cheshire 5k at the end of August and did a PB of 17:57, which was around about a 30-second PB from where I was previously. So really pleased with that. It gave me good confidence knowing that the marathon pace that I want to run, I have got it in me to break 18 on 5k. So if you're adding up every 5k, and if let's say I want to go through in about 20, 30 or 21 for each 5k, it seems a lot more comfortable when my PB is under 18 minutes rather than it being 18:30 and getting closer to the sort of race pace that I need there. I'm a little bit more at my limit if I was running closer to that. So I was pleased with that result, and we'll go into part 3, which is the marathon block. Starting from September now, so this is probably the period around about where I started doing my vlogging on the channel. So I started doing those weekly roundups of my training. So first big race in September was a big race. It was the big half in London, something I'd not done before. Just wanted to see what it was like. It was quite a busy event there. I ran 1:23 at the big half. Wanted to give it a go at targeting that 1:20 mark, so I did set out at low 6-minute mile pace and realised after 2 miles that just wasn't feeling it on the day. Dropped it down a little bit slower to about 6:20s, 6:30s in the end, and did feel like a few niggles on the way. So I think it was my adductor felt a bit tight at about halfway, so just thought, well, the main goal is the marathon in October. I was only about 7 or 8 weeks away from Frankfurt, so I didn't want to push it too much, and ended up being close to a PB in 1:23 there at the big half, so pleased with that. I just wanted to get out racing really, so that was the first of 3 halves that I did in September. Probably didn't plan on doing quite this many, but I just sort of treated them as my longer tempo runs. If I was going to be doing sort of a 10-mile tempo anyway in training, why not just make it part of a race, go experience and enjoy that race atmosphere and have a bit of company along the way doing it. So that big half, after that I then flew to Spain and did a bit of a training camp out in Spain that was organised by Best Athletics, and Sam Harrison had asked me to go along and train with them, as she was invited by Best Athletics to train there. And it's in fact where we're going back to training in a couple of weeks' time in the new year in Torrevieja. So that was the plan for going to Spain there, was just to be around good athletes there and train and try and just build up my mileage there for the middle of the marathon block. So I wanted to hit my peak weeks in the middle of September, keep the mileage fairly high, and then tail it down towards the end of October where my goal marathon was at Frankfurt on the 30th, I believe it was, of October. So in the first week in Spain I ended up running 100 miles in the week, which had 2 or 3 sessions thrown in there, but I mean, with not working in the day, running twice a day and being able to recover as well during the day, I didn't find this probably as hard as when I'd done, say, a 60 or 70 mile week at home with working full time and everything that goes with being at home and being more busy. So quite enjoyed getting that mileage in. And the second week of that training camp I did 80 miles, which concluded with a half marathon at Nottingham. So I did the Robin Hood half for the 3rd time. I think I've done this a couple of occasions before, and I ran a course PB there, so I did 1:24 at Notts Half. Again, sort of thought I'll try and target this 1:20 mark, but on the back of 100 mile in an 80 mile week, and still had a little bit of that in my legs. Maybe if I've given it another week and tapered properly, I could have looked at breaking that 1:20, but again, it was just the main goal was to build towards Frankfurt Marathon. I didn't really prioritise having a good half time, really just wanted to have a hard run and get the training effect from it. So that was Notts Half at the end of September. I think it was either the next week or 2 weeks after, I did a late entry into the Bournemouth half. So I was going to be doing like a 10-12 mile sort of tempo long run anyway on the Sunday while I was there, and the half marathon was on that weekend. So I entered that and took the GoPro round and ran it in just over 1:25, I think. So it did have a couple of quite big hills in there, one that I did have to stop and walk up. So that wasn't too bad of a time around there. I thought 1:25, quite exposed on the seafront too with the wind. So yeah, very pleased with that. And I thought I'm feeling in good shape going into Frankfurt. So what I wanted to target in Frankfurt was that 250. So I thought running a 1:25 quite comfortably at a half marathon a few weeks before it, so I think this was around about 3 weeks before Frankfurt, that I could look at trying to target holding that pace from halfway and hold it for the full 26 at Frankfurt. So moving on to Frankfurt Marathon, which is probably the main event of the year for me. I'd done well, I got my 2:57 in April, but I did want to really take quite some time off this as I trained really well all summer. Had a really solid 4 to 5 months of training since that April marathon. So I was targeting that 250 at Frankfurt. It wasn't quite the case. A lot of things sort of went wrong at Frankfurt. First of things being the weather was a bit too warm for, I get quite warm anyway when I'm running, so for me running in 15 to 20 degrees for a marathon would have been sort of alright for a 10k or a half. I did tend to struggle in that last half especially. I mean, I was too warm warming up for it. I'd also gotten a bit of a mix-up with not having my racing chip on my shoe. I just assumed that they come in your bib on race morning, which was just a stupid mistake really, and ended up having to start in a later wave, which then meant I was more crowded, missed drink stations, didn't hydrate properly, and there was no surprise really that I sort of ran the first 15-16 miles of that race at the pace I wanted to, but in the back of my head knew that it was going to bite me at some point, that it would catch up on me, and it did around about 18 miles. I was just quite dehydrated really, just felt a little bit dizzy. I was just grabbing as much water as I could find on the course. So I'd gone from sort of not having really anything to drink in the first half because I kept missing the drink stations, to then stopping and walking at all the drink stations. So going through halfway, I think I was on for about 126 through halfway, so it would have been a low 250-ish, which I'd have been very pleased with. I then thought, can I sort of nurse it in a sub 3, because I've still got quite a chunk I can drop down on. But it got to around 20 to 22 miles, and then I knew then that I didn't really have the sort of energy or fitness to even finish just jogging it in. So I did end up with 3:07 at Frankfurt, but again, I've done the full video review on that. I was quite pleased with the training block and how that all went, and that meant more to me than getting that, say, sub 250 on the day. Although it would have been a great achievement, I can still target that next year or the year after if I wanted to. It's always going to be there. It's something I can aim for. So after Frankfurt, I sort of gave myself a little time to recover, and then gave myself a focus towards the end of the year on what I wanted to do. So I had entered the Telford 10k in December. So actually in November, the only race that I did was the Derby 10-mile race, which I've done a few times before. I think this was my third time doing it. I did that in 1:04, which was really close to a PB, but I just wanted to treat it as like a tempo run, where I was running hard. So I did actually very pleasingly went through 5 miles in 32 minutes and then finished in 64 minutes. So really happy with that, just keeping those consistent splits there. And it was a good run out really, to see that I got that endurance and the sort of at that speed that I wanted to as well. So pleased with that Derby 10 result. And then it was only a couple of weeks after that the Telford 10k race day was. So I'd been adapting my training, I'd knocked the mileage down, I'd been doing sort of 2 to 3 sessions a week, focusing on sort of 5k, 10k work, focusing on my speed. And I did manage to get a really good PB at Telford 10k, so I knocked nearly 2 minutes off my PB. I did 36:41 at Telford. So, well, I mean, unofficially my PB was 37:15, so I did knock around 30 seconds off a time that I'd run before, but my chip time didn't work, as it was one of those races that were organised in lockdown. I unfortunately didn't get that to show on sort of my Run Britain profile, so my PB was sort of 38.5 before that. So to break it and do 36:41, I was really pleased with, and it ticked off my 3rd distance PB of the year. So all in all, a year where I probably thought I didn't race as much as I probably could have done, with doing various sort of trail events, been quite busy at work, and sort of prioritising my training towards 2 big marathons really. I did get quite a lot done. I got a 5k PB, a 10k PB and a marathon PB. So that's 3 of my main PBs in 1 year. Really happy with that. Slightly disappointed I missed out on that half marathon PB, but that's probably one that I can look at targeting next year. So thanks for listening. I hope that sort of give you a bit of an insight into my progression over year, and probably filled in a few of the gaps from September backwards to how my running's been since I've started the channel. So thanks for listening. I'll be checking in the new year with the weekly roundups and some goals for what races and what sort of times I'm targeting in the new year.